Ethan Cole's boots crunched through the frozen snow as his young son Liam walked beside him, their loyal German shepherd, Valor, leading the way through the blinding Christmas Eve storm. Then Valor stopped, ears sharp, growling low. Just ahead, in front of the old church, two small figures huddled together on the steps. Twin girls, barefoot, trembling, their lips blue from the cold. "Please, don't take us back," one whispered, her voice breaking through the wind. "She'll find us." That night, what began as a simple walk home would turn into a story of faith, redemption, and a miracle only God Himself could have written. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and get ready for a story that will melt your heart, even in the middle of the storm. The storm had settled over Maple Hollow like a living thing, breathing cold into every street, every roof, every trembling heart. The night sky was a swirl of white and gray, where snowflakes danced like silent ghosts beneath the flickering lamplight. It was Christmas Eve, though the world looked more like a frozen battlefield than a night of peace. Ethan Cole walked slowly along the edge of the road, his heavy boots crunching through the snow. He was 42, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man shaped by both duty and loss. His dark hair, now dusted with gray, curled slightly beneath the hood of his weather-worn jacket. A thin scar ran from his jaw to his chin, a souvenir from his firefighting days. And his eyes, deep hazel with flecks of gold, held the quiet exhaustion of a man who had seen too much. There was a heaviness in the way he moved, not from age, but from the silence left behind by grief. Beside him trudged Liam, his 11-year-old son, small but sturdy, wrapped in a puffy red coat that made him look like a wandering ember in the snow. His cheeks were flushed, and every now and then he kicked at a mound of snow, pretending to be brave, though the biting cold made his lips tremble. He had his father's eyes, warm, searching, but his mother's smile, the one Ethan hadn't seen in years. Since Clara's death 2 winters ago, Liam had grown quieter, though he tried to hide it behind curious questions and nervous laughter. Between them padded Valor, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat and an alert gaze that never seemed to rest. Once a search and rescue dog, Valor had worked beside Ethan in fires, floods, and wrecks. Even now, though retired, his every movement was precise, head lifted high, ears twitching, nose to the wind. He was loyal beyond measure, but age had softened his gait, and a faint white streak ran down his muzzle like a mark of wisdom. The trio moved down Main Street, past shuttered shops and glowing windows strung with lights. The bells from St. Agnes Church rang out faintly over the snow, a low, solemn hymn that mingled with the whisper of the wind. Ethan tilted his head toward the sound, pausing. The church sat on a small hill just ahead, its tall spire reaching into the storm-dark sky, each bell toll echoing like a heartbeat through the town. "Dad," Liam said, his voice muffled by his scarf, "do you think Mom can hear those bells?" Ethan swallowed. "I think she can, son. I think she's listening." They reached the church steps, where the snow had drifted into soft, uneven mounds. Valor stopped first, head tilted, body tense. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not of aggression, but of concern. He stepped forward, nose brushing at something near the base of the stone columns. Ethan frowned and followed his gaze. At first he thought it was just a pile of blankets, but then a small hand moved. 2 small figures were huddled together on the steps. Children, twin girls no older than 8, dressed in thin summer dresses soaked through with ice. Their blonde hair clung to their faces, tangled and stiff, and their skin was so pale it nearly blended with the snow. "Dad," Liam whispered, voice cracking. "They're not moving." Ethan's pulse surged. He dropped to his knees, brushing snow from their shoulders. Their bodies were rigid with cold, trembling violently, breath shallow. He took off his coat and wrapped it around them, his own body bracing against the wind. "Hey, sweethearts," he said softly, his voice trembling despite his calm tone. "You're okay. You're safe now. Can you hear me?" One of the girls stirred slightly, her lips, blue and cracked, parted with effort. "Please, don't take us back. She'll find us." Her voice was barely more than a breath. Ethan froze, feeling something twist deep inside his chest. That tone, that terror. He'd heard it before, on the faces of burn victims he'd pulled from collapsing homes, on children who'd lost everything in one instant. But this was fear of the living, not the dead. Liam knelt beside him, tears welling in his eyes. "Dad, we can't leave them, please." Ethan looked at him, this boy who had already lost so much, and nodded firmly. "We're not leaving anyone tonight." He scooped both girls into his arms. They were impossibly light, as if the wind could carry them away. Their fragile hands clutched weakly at his sleeve, seeking warmth, seeking safety. Valor trotted beside them, whining softly, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Inside the church doorway, faint candlelight flickered, the remnants of a late-night service. But Ethan didn't stop to call for help. Something told him these girls didn't need more strangers. They needed a home, even just for the night. As he carried them down the steps, the bells above began to ring again, louder this time, echoing through the hollow streets. The sound felt almost like a promise, or perhaps a warning. By the time Ethan reached his truck parked near the edge of town, the snow had thickened into white curtains. Liam rushed ahead, fumbling with the door, while Valor leapt into the back seat. Ethan laid the girls gently across the seat, tucking them beneath blankets. Their skin was icy, but there was a faint pulse, fragile, stubborn. The older twin stirred again, blinking slowly. Up close, Ethan could see the bruises along her jaw, the faint outline of a handprint. He felt anger rise, sharp and cold as the air. Whoever had done this had meant for them not to survive the night. "Sir," the girl whispered, her breath fogging the air. "You shouldn't help us. She'll be angry." Ethan leaned closer, voice steady. "No one's going to hurt you again. Not while I'm here." Her eyes fluttered shut, tears freezing at the corners. The younger one shifted, curling into her sister's arms. Liam reached out, gently covering them both with his scarf. "Dad," he said quietly, "what if she dies?" Ethan looked through the windshield, where the world had turned to blinding white. "Then we fight harder," he said. "That's what your mom would have done." For a moment silence fell, broken only by the hum of the truck's engine and the muffled whimper of the wind. Valor rested his head on the seat beside the girls, eyes alert, as if guarding them from unseen ghosts. Ethan turned the key, the headlights cutting through the storm. The road ahead was barely visible, a narrow vein of gray vanishing into the snow. He glanced in the mirror, two broken children asleep against each other, a loyal dog watching over them, his son gripping the edge of his seat. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what story he had just stepped into. But as the bells of St. Agnes faded behind them, one thought burned in his chest with fierce certainty. This was the night everything would change. The truck rolled forward into the storm, swallowed by white silence, leaving only footprints and the distant echo of church bells behind. The storm raged through the night, blanketing the small Vermont town in silence and white. By the time Ethan's old pickup rumbled into the gravel driveway of his cabin on the outskirts of Maple Hollow, the world outside was a blur of snow and shadows. The cabin stood low and sturdy, built of cedar and stone, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. Inside, the lights glowed a soft amber, promising warmth against the merciless cold. Ethan pushed the door open with his shoulder, carrying both unconscious girls in his arms while Liam hurried ahead to clear the couch. Valor darted inside, shaking snow from his fur before trotting over to sniff the air as if inspecting the house for danger. The air was thick with pine, firewood, and faint traces of cinnamon, Clara's scent, though she had been gone nearly 2 years. Ethan's chest tightened. He could still remember how she used to hum Christmas carols while baking cookies in this very kitchen. The house had felt unbearably empty since then, the kind of emptiness that lingered no matter how many fires he built. He laid the girls gently on the couch near the fireplace. Their small forms were barely visible beneath the thick blankets. Liam rushed to the kitchen, returning with a kettle of warm water. "Dad, should we take them to the hospital?" he asked. His voice was small, uncertain. Ethan hesitated. The hospital was 20 miles away, the roads nearly impassable. And more than that, he remembered the fear in the older girl's eyes, that desperate whisper, "She'll find us." He couldn't explain it, but he trusted his gut, the same instinct that had saved him from collapsing roofs and burning walls. "Not yet," he said softly. We warm them first. Then we'll see. He fetched towels, gently rubbing their hands and feet to bring color back to their skin. Valor sat beside the couch, ears perked, as though guarding the two children. The dog's steady presence seemed to calm the girls. The younger one's trembling eased slightly, and her breathing deepened. Ethan poured warm, not hot water into 2 mugs and added honey. If they wake up, give them small sips, he told Liam. An hour passed before one of the girls stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, pale blue, wide and uncertain, like someone waking from a nightmare. Hey there, Ethan said, crouching beside her. You're safe now. I'm Ethan, and this is my son, Liam. You remember anything? She blinked, staring at him as though unsure whether to believe his words. My name, Ellie, she whispered, voice rough. My sister's Nellie. Her small hand found the other girl's, who was still sleeping deeply. Is she? She's alive, Ethan said gently. You both are. Ellie nodded faintly, tears welling in her eyes, though she made no sound. Ethan recognized that kind of silence, the silence of someone who had learned not to cry out, even in pain. He glanced toward Liam, who sat cross-legged on the rug, eyes full of worry and compassion. Dad, can I give her the honey water now? Ethan nodded, and Liam carefully helped Ellie sip from the mug. The warmth seemed to revive her a little. She shuddered, then exhaled a shaky breath. Where are your parents? Ethan asked softly. For a moment Ellie said nothing. Then she answered, Gone. Long time. We lived with Aunt Nora. Her voice trembled on the last word. Ethan's jaw tightened. The woman who hurt you? Ellie nodded slowly, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting to see someone standing there in the snow. She said we cost too much to feed. Said we should earn our keep. Today she threw us out. Liam's small fists clenched. That's evil. Ethan rested a hand on his son's shoulder. Some people forget what it means to be human, he murmured. Then, turning back to Ellie, he said, No one's going to throw you out again, do you understand? She studied him for a long time, as though searching for deception. Then she nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and sank back into the pillow. The night dragged on, the wind howling outside while the fire crackled softly within. Ethan brewed another pot of tea, leaning against the counter as exhaustion weighed on him. For a moment he saw Clara's face reflected in the dark window, not real, just memory. You can't save everyone, she used to tell him when he came home haunted by the lives he couldn't rescue. But tonight, he wasn't sure if he was trying to save them or himself. A sharp knock startled him. Valor barked once, low and cautious. Ethan opened the door to find Martha Green, his neighbor, standing on the porch wrapped in a thick wool coat, her cheeks red from the wind. Martha was in her late 50s, short and round-faced, with kind brown eyes behind fogged glasses. She was the sort of woman who always smelled faintly of bread and lavender, and whose heart was much larger than her patience for gossip. Lord, Ethan, it's a blizzard out here, she exclaimed, brushing snow from her coat. I saw your truck lights and thought you'd lost your mind driving in this weather. Then her eyes landed on the two girls sleeping on the couch. Her voice softened immediately. Oh my. Who are they? Ethan hesitated, then said, Found them by the church, half frozen. Martha's brows furrowed. Good heavens. She moved closer, gently touching one girl's forehead. Poor things. I'll fetch some soup from my house. They need food more than words. Within 20 minutes, she returned with a steaming pot of chicken broth, her expression tight with concern. You'll have to report this to Sheriff Daniels come morning, she said. Yeah, Ethan replied, though his voice was uncertain. He knew Sheriff Ray Daniels, a tall, weathered man in his late 40s, with a lined face and a cautious temperament. Ray had been Ethan's friend since high school, but he was by the book, the kind who would involve social services immediately. And Ethan wasn't sure yet if handing the girls over was truly keeping them safe. When Martha left, the cabin fell silent again. The clock ticked past midnight. Liam had fallen asleep in an armchair, Valor curled beside him. Ethan remained awake, sitting near the fireplace, watching the flames twist and fall. He thought of the girls' bruises, of Clara's empty chair at the table, of how easily the world could turn cruel. Near dawn, Nellie woke. She looked so much like her sister it startled him. Same pale hair, same thin frame, but her eyes were a deeper blue, almost gray, and carried a sharper awareness. "Where's Aunt Nora?" she asked weakly. "You're safe," Ethan repeated gently. "No one's coming for you tonight." Her lips quivered. "You don't understand. She always finds us." Valor lifted his head, ears pricked. For a moment, Ethan could have sworn he heard something beyond the storm, the crunch of tires on snow, faint but real. He stood slowly, peering through the frosted window. Headlights glowed far down the road before vanishing again into the swirling white. He wasn't sure if it was just another car fighting the storm, or if someone had already begun to look for what he had found. The morning came gray and heavy, the storm finally easing into a soft, almost mournful drizzle of snow. The world outside Ethan's cabin looked like a blank canvas, trees bowed under white weight, fences lost in frost, and the road covered in untouched silence. But inside, the house was alive again. The fire had burned all night, and the faint scent of Martha's chicken soup still lingered in the air. For the first time in years, the cabin wasn't filled with quiet absence. It was filled with breathing, small and fragile though it was. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. He hadn't slept. His mind spun in endless circles about the girls, the headlights he thought he'd seen, and the decision he knew he could no longer delay. Across from him, Liam stirred his cereal absently, his hair sticking up in every direction, his eyes still puffy from sleep. Valor rested near the door, head on his paws, his amber eyes half open yet alert, as though guarding against unseen threats. The girls were still asleep on the couch, bundled beneath layers of blankets. Ellie, the older twin by only minutes, was curled protectively around Nellie. Even in rest, their faces bore the story of what they'd endured. Dark bruises beneath their eyes, shallow hollows where baby fat should have been. Ethan watched them, wondering how long it had been since they'd slept in warmth, since anyone had called them safe. He glanced at the clock, 8:12 a.m. Sheriff Daniels would be on patrol by now. Ethan's fingers tightened around the mug. He'd promised Clara, before she died, that he'd always do the right thing. But what was right? Reporting the girls might mean returning them to the system, strangers, foster homes, and paperwork that rarely led to justice. But not reporting them could mean trouble for him and for Liam. A soft sound interrupted his thoughts. Ellie had woken, blinking slowly at the light filtering through the curtains. She sat up cautiously, her thin shoulders trembling under the blanket. When her gaze found Ethan, she froze like a startled bird. "Hey there," he said gently. "You're safe, remember? I made some oatmeal if you're hungry." Her stomach betrayed her with a small growl, but her lips pressed together as if afraid to ask. "It's okay," he added. "No one here will ever punish you for being hungry." Ellie hesitated, then nodded. She woke her sister carefully, whispering something Ethan couldn't catch. Nellie rubbed her eyes and looked around, confusion flickering across her face. But when Valor trotted over and nudged her hand with his nose, a faint, uncertain smile appeared. "His name's Valor," Liam said brightly. "He used to save people when Dad was a firefighter. Now he mostly steals socks." That earned a small giggle from both girls. Quick, fleeting, but real. Ethan felt something tighten in his throat. It had been a long time since laughter had lived in this house. He served them oatmeal with honey and milk, and they ate quietly, as if afraid the food might disappear. When Nellie reached for a second bowl, she stopped halfway, glancing nervously at her sister. Ellie gave a small nod, and only then did she allow herself to continue eating. Ethan saw the exchange, his chest aching. Whatever they'd lived through had taught them that hunger was shameful, that permission was survival. The knock on the door came sharp and sudden. Valor growled low, rising instantly. Ethan exchanged a glance with Liam. The sound was firm, authoritative. He opened the door to find Sheriff Ray Daniels standing there, his tall frame dusted with snow. Ray was in his late 40s, with the rugged look of a man who'd spent too many winters chasing problems through small towns. His beard was flecked with gray, his blue eyes clear but cautious. "Morning, Ethan," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard from Martha you found a couple of kids last night." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, they were freezing by St. Agnes, could have died." Ray stepped inside, shaking off the cold. "Let me see them." Ethan hesitated, then nodded toward the living room. Ray's gaze softened when he saw the girls, tiny figures huddled near the fire. "Good Lord," he muttered. "They look half-starved." "They are," Ethan said. "They said their aunt threw them out." Ray crouched beside the girls. "You girls remember your aunt's name?" Ellie nodded slowly. "Nora Blake. We lived near Hollow Creek." Ray straightened, expression darkening. "Blake, yeah, I know the family. The Blakes have been on the department's radar a few times. Domestic complaints, never stuck." He turned to Ethan. "You did the right thing bringing them in, but you know I've got to call it in officially." "I figured," Ethan said, though his tone betrayed reluctance. Ray studied him for a moment. "You still don't trust the system, do you?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "You know what happened after Clara died? The welfare board nearly took Liam when I was late on a form. The system doesn't care about people, Ray. It cares about boxes being checked." Ray sighed, rubbing his temples. "I get it, Ethan, but I can't look the other way on something like this. There's a missing person report from Hollow Creek, 2 twin girls, last seen 3 days ago. I'll file a temporary custody hold in your name until Child Services gets here. That'll buy us some time." "Time for what?" "To find out who the hell this aunt really is," Ray said. "If half of what those kids are saying is true, we're dealing with abuse charges, serious ones." After Ray left, Ethan locked the door and stood in silence. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the world felt no less cold. Liam sat beside the twins, helping them draw shapes on scraps of paper. Valor lay at their feet, his tail thumping whenever Nellie giggled. For a sample. Brief, fragile moment, everything seemed normal. Then the phone rang. Ethan crossed the room and picked it up. Static crackled, followed by a slow, deliberate female voice. "You have something that belongs to me." His blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The voice laughed softly. "You know who I am. Tell my nieces their aunt says hello, and if you think hiding them in that little cabin will keep them safe, you're mistaken." The line went dead. Ethan stood motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear, his heart hammering against his ribs. Valor rose to his feet, ears forward, sensing the tension in his master. Liam looked up from the rug. "Dad?" Ethan forced a calm he didn't feel. "Everything's fine, buddy." But his hands were shaking. He looked toward the window. Outside, beyond the trees, a dark sedan sat idling at the edge of the road. The driver's silhouette was barely visible through the fogged windshield. Slowly, deliberately, the car pulled away, disappearing down the winding road toward Hollow Creek. Ethan set the phone down, his pulse still racing. He knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. The past the twins had fled was catching up, and whatever waited behind that woman's cold voice would soon find its way to Maple Hollow. The wind had stilled by the time the sun dipped behind the Vermont pines, but the quiet was not peace. It was the kind that pressed on the skin, that made every sound seem sharper. The day had been long and heavy. Ethan sat by the window, the phone still resting on the table where he had left it after the call. The snow outside shimmered under a thin moonlight, and every shifting shadow looked like a figure waiting just beyond the tree line. Liam was upstairs with the girls, reading them a bedtime story. His voice drifted faintly down the staircase, soft and steady. Ethan had tried to focus on that sound. It was ordinary, safe. But beneath it pulsed the echo of that woman's voice. "You have something that belongs to me." He looked toward the hearth where Valor slept, though one ear twitched at every creak. Even in rest, the old shepherd was vigilant. Ethan envied him, the simplicity of loyalty without fear, of action without hesitation. A soft knock came from the back door. Not loud, but deliberate. Ethan froze. Valor's head lifted instantly, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Ethan reached for the revolver he kept in the drawer by the table. He hadn't used it in years, not since the fire station robbery case he'd helped the sheriff with a decade ago. He moved quietly, boots silent against the wood floor, and eased the curtain aside. Outside stood Ray Daniels, his parka dusted white, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the snow. Ethan exhaled, unlocking the door. "You scared the hell out of me," he muttered. "Sorry," Ray said, stepping in. "Didn't want to use the front, didn't want to spook the kids." His face was grave. "We traced the call that came through your line earlier. It was routed from a burner phone registered near Hollow Creek. Guess who lives just outside Hollow Creek? Ethan didn't answer. He already knew. Ray continued, I put out a patrol notice, but with the weather, half the roads are still blocked. If she's driving, she knows these woods better than anyone. I don't like it, Ethan. Not one bit. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. She knows where I live, Ray. She's been here before the storm. You sure? He hesitated. When Clara was alive, the church charity she volunteered for, St. Agnes, used to deliver food supplies. Nora Blake was one of the recipients. I never met her personally, but Clara did. Said she was strange, jealous of everyone, like she carried a grudge against the whole world. Ray nodded slowly. I'll station a deputy near the highway, but until morning, keep your doors locked and your lights on. He started to leave, then paused. And Ethan, don't play hero. You're not on the job anymore. After the sheriff left, Ethan double-checked every window latch, every lock. The night deepened around the cabin, and the snow began falling again, soft but relentless. Upstairs, the children had finally fallen asleep. Liam slept in a chotad sleeping bag beside the couch where Ellie and Nellie lay under the old plaid blanket. The dog was stretched across the floor, his tail occasionally twitching as if he were guarding their dreams. Ethan took the old armchair by the fire, too wired to rest. He stared at the flames until they blurred. His mind wandered to Clara again, her voice, her laughter, the way she would touch his arm when he doubted himself. You can't fix the world, Ethan, she had once told him, but you can still light a small corner of it. Maybe that's what he was doing now, lighting one small corner for 3 children who'd lost their way in the cold. He didn't realize he'd fallen asleep until Valor's bark shattered the silence. The sound was sharp, urgent, not the lazy warning bark of a house dog, but the kind that meant something's wrong. Ethan bolted upright. The fire had burned low, casting the room in orange shadows. He heard it then, a faint sound, metal on glass. The back window. Ethan grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the kitchen. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the frosted window pane. A shape moved outside. Quick, darting. He flung open the back door, flashlight raised, heart pounding. Nothing, just the swirl of snow. The woods beyond loomed black and silent. But then he saw it. Boot prints, fresh, leading from the trees to his porch, then back again. He followed a few steps out, the cold biting through his coat. Something fluttered near the porch rail, a piece of fabric caught on a nail. He pulled it free. It was from a child's dress. Behind him, Valor barked again, this time from inside the cabin. Ethan spun around and saw movement through the window. Liam standing in the doorway at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. Dad, the girls, Ellie's gone. Ethan's stomach dropped. He ran back inside, his boots thudding on the floorboards. Nellie was sitting upright on the couch, sobbing, clutching Valor's collar. She said she heard someone calling her name, she cried. She thought it was Mom. Ethan knelt beside her. Nellie, look at me. No one called her. Do you understand? No one. But outside, through the wind in the trees, he thought he heard it too. A voice, faint but unmistakable, calling softly into the snow. Ellie, come home. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and coat, his pulse roaring in his ears. Valor barked again, already heading for the door. Liam, stay here with your sister, Ethan ordered. Lock the doors behind me. Then he stepped into the storm. The beam of his light swept across the white expanse, catching a small figure at the edge of the woods. The wind cut through the forest like a living thing, whispering through the branches, tugging at Ethan's coat as he ran. The beam of his flashlight bobbed wildly across the snow, catching glimpses of small footprints leading deeper into the woods. Ellie! He shouted, voice breaking against the storm. Ellie, stop! It's me! But the only reply was the moan of the wind and Valor's urgent barking ahead. The forest loomed dark and endless, the pines bending low under their burden of snow. Ethan's breath burned in his lungs, the cold slicing at his face, but he kept going. Then, through the swirl of white, he saw her. A small figure in a thin nightdress, standing barefoot before the frozen stream. Her hair whipped across her face, and she turned toward him, her eyes glassy and distant. Ellie, he cried, stumbling toward her. Don't move! She blinked as if waking from a dream. I heard her, she whispered. My mom, she was calling me. Ethan slowed, careful not to startle her. He crouched a few steps away. I know, sweetheart, but that wasn't your mom. Sometimes when people hurt us, they use our memories against us. Her lip trembled. But she said I'd be safe if I came home. Valor stepped between them, tail low, ears pinned back, his growl deep and protective. Then, from the shadows across the stream, a flashlight flickered, once, twice before steadying. A woman's voice called out, soft, falsely sweet. Ellie, darling, Aunt Nora's here now. Ethan's body tensed. The figure that stepped into the light was taller than he expected, wrapped in a long gray coat, her blonde hair streaked with white. Nora Blake's face was sharp, thin, almost bird-like, with eyes that glinted cold in the darkness. Even in the half-light, Ethan could see the strain, her hands trembling slightly, her smile too tight. She's lying to you, Ethan said firmly. Don't listen. Nora's smile widened, though her eyes burned. And who are you to tell her that? You think you can just take what's mine? Ethan straightened. They're not yours. You lost that right the moment you threw them into the snow. Her laughter was brittle, echoing across the frozen air. You think you understand anything about family? You? A broken man playing house with someone else's ghosts? Ethan didn't move. He felt Valor edge closer to his leg, a silent readiness in his stance. Maybe I am broken, Ethan said, his voice low, but I'll still fight to keep them safe. Nora's smile faltered, replaced by something raw, a flicker of guilt or pain before it hardened again. You don't know what it's like, she hissed. Everyone leaves, everyone betrays you. My sister had everything, love, money, a home, and I had nothing. I just wanted what should have been mine. You punished 2 children because of your jealousy, Ethan said, stepping forward. You call that love? Nora's hand twitched. They were ungrateful. No, Ethan interrupted. They were innocent. For a moment, the forest went silent. The wind died, and only the faint crackle of ice along the stream filled the air. Then, with a choked cry, Nora lunged forward. Valor leapt before Ethan could react, his bark exploding into the night. The woman stumbled back, slipping on the frozen ground. Her flashlight fell, rolling across the ice before plunging into the stream with a hiss. The beam vanished. The world turned dark. When Ethan's vision adjusted, he saw Nora sitting in the snow, clutching her knee, her fury gone, replaced by exhaustion. She looked suddenly small, defeated. I didn't mean to, she murmured. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Ethan didn't answer. He reached for his phone, his hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. Ray, he said when the sheriff picked up, I've found her. By the time Sheriff Daniels arrived with his deputies, Nora was silent, staring blankly at the trees as they led her away. Ellie clung to Ethan's coat, her body trembling violently, while Valor stood beside her, nose pressed to her hand. When they returned to the cabin, dawn was breaking over Maple Hollow. The sky was pale gold, the kind of fragile light that came after a storm. Nellie ran to her sister the moment they stepped inside, wrapping her in a fierce hug. Ethan crouched beside them, his breath catching. You're safe now, he said quietly. Both of you. That afternoon, the sheriff's office confirmed Nora's arrest. Ray stopped by the cabin once more, exhaustion written across his face. She's being charged with child endangerment, assault and neglect, he said. You did good, Ethan. You saved their lives. Ethan looked at the twins sitting by the fire, Valor curled protectively at their feet, Liam showing them how to roast marshmallows on sticks. He gave a faint smile. No, Ray. They saved mine. Weeks passed. Snow melted from the rooftops and spring began to touch the edges of the forest. Paperwork came, endless forms, home inspections, interviews. But the day finally came when Ray arrived with a simple envelope. Inside were the adoption papers, stamped and signed. Kelly and Nellie Blake became Ellie and Nellie Cole. That evening, they visited Clara's grave behind the cabin. The headstone sat beneath an old birch tree, its bark pale as moonlight. Ethan placed a small bouquet of wildflowers at its base. You'd have loved them, Clara, he whispered. They're brave and kind, and they've made this house a home again. Liam stood beside him, his arm around Nellie's shoulder. Ellie knelt, brushing her fingers along the carved name. Thank you, she said softly, for giving us your family. The wind moved through the trees, gentle this time, almost like an answer. That night, as they sat by the fire, Valor snoring beside them, Liam asked, "Dad, do you think Mom knows what happened?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I think she does, and I think she's proud we didn't stop to wonder whether helping was our job. We just did it." Outside, the last snow of the season began to fall. Light, peaceful, harmless now. The storm had passed. In its place was warmth, laughter, and a home full of second chances. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt that rarest kind of peace. Not the silence of grief, but the quiet certainty that love, once given freely, never truly leaves. It simply becomes the light that stays. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with trumpets or angels. They come quietly, in the middle of a snowstorm, through a stranger's open door, or in the arms of a child who still believes in love. That night in Maple Hollow, God didn't part the sky. He whispered into one man's heart and said, "Stop, help, protect." And Ethan listened. Because every time we choose compassion over comfort, every time we stop for someone in pain, we become part of a miracle far greater than ourselves. God doesn't always send heroes. Sometimes He simply gives us the chance to become one. If you're watching this, maybe He's reminding you too. The world is still full of brokenness, but also full of second chances. Be that light. Be the one who notices. Be the one who stops. May God bless you and everyone who still believes that kindness can heal what cruelty has broken. Share this story if it touched your heart. Comment Amen if you believe miracles still happen. Subscribe to Soulful Stories to spread faith, hope, and the gentle light of love, one story at a time. The miracle wasn't that God appeared in the storm. It was that love refused to let anyone stay lost in it.